What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Home Built Workshop. Today is a Q&A episode. I've been taking questions from you guys for a little while now. We're now going to sit down and run through those questions, so stick around. It's going to be fun. So over the past month or so, I've been asking you guys for questions for a Q&A episode. We've now compiled somewhat of a list here, and we're going to run through them. Hayley's going to read the questions off. I'm going to do my best to answer them. You ready to do this? Mm-hmm. You know what we need for this? What? Like one of those news things. Beep, 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 beep. News flash.
You should edit to make that.
Maybe we will, if I can find one of them news sounds. Because it looks like we're at the news desk. You like when you watch the news on TV? All we need is like a cup of coffee on either side of us. Welcome to the evening news from Home Built Workshop. Reporting today is Hayley. Take it away, Hayley. What do you have for us today?
Question from Kathleen O. How did you get started in woodworking?
So woodworking is something that I have been involved in for quite a long time. I remember being somewhere around 10 years old, probably around that age, when I started doing some woodworking projects with my grandpa down in his basement, your great grandpa. We used to build a lot of different little projects. He is a woodworker carpenter for quite a long time and always was working on something with his hands. And I also got started doing that as well. It's something that I really just got introduced to from my grandpa, picked up on a lot of things from him, and then really just carried on with it.
Josh H. asked, if you could buy one tool and money was no object, what would it be and why?
What would it be if money was no object? I think probably the first thing I would do, if money was no object, I'd probably just build a bigger shop. But that's not really a tool and not really what he's asking. So I think if money was no object, and I'm going to kind of take space out of there, if space was not an issue, I probably would buy a big CNC machine. Maybe like a 4x8 CNC. That way we could like make guitars, make a lot of things all of the time, and it can be off doing the work while we're working on something else. So that would probably be what I would get. A nice big one, not really a small one, but maybe like a 4x8, something with automatic tool changers, and really kind of go all out. A lot of those electronic, digital things like a laser, CNC machine, that sort of stuff. Probably a CNC.
Poor Conservative asks, what is your favorite wood glue?
Favorite wood glue? Well, Poor Conservative, that would be a really easy one for me. It'd be Titebond 2. It's really the only glue I use. Once in a while, I will use Titebond 3 for certain projects, but I like Titebond 2. I use it for pretty much every single thing I need to glue, unless it's something that's going to live outside. I've never had an issue with Titebond 2. I use it for cutting boards where it sees occasional moisture. I use it on guitars, and some people say you shouldn't use it on guitars because it's not as hard as the original Titebond, but I've never had an issue with it. I keep it on hand all the time, and it's really the main one I use.
Marky is asking if it's true that you used to be a puppeteer.
Well, that one is a little bit of a surprise question, not one that I expected, but yes, it is true. I used to work with puppetry. I spent several of my early teenage years working with a local puppet team and doing a lot of performances from New York to, I remember, South Carolina. Lots of places in between there, a lot of traveling, doing a lot of things. It's really kind of where I got my start running live sound, setting up PA systems, running lights, a little bit of pyrotechnics, and a ton of performing in front of people. I used to sing and do a lot of performances in front of crowds, some small crowds, some very, very large crowds, and really led to a lot of what I draw on now. I got a lot of that experience early on, and really I'm finding now that a lot of that stuff was super valuable to learn back then because it's really tied into a lot of what I do these days. Good question. What else you got for us?
Andrew asks, do you prefer to work with hardwoods or softwoods?
Well, Andrew, I think that's a really good question. If I had to choose one, I would probably go with hardwoods, mainly because that's what I use a lot for a lot of the projects that I build. Not necessarily really because it's my favorite, but for guitars and things like that, they're usually made out of hardwoods, and that's what I typically tend to use. But I do also like softwoods because they tend to be a little more inexpensive, at least the softwoods that I use and have access to. They work really nice. They're not near as hard to work as a hardwood, coincidentally, but if I had to choose one, I would choose hardwood.
Brett M asks, do you have any tips and tricks for the Space Challenge workshop?
Tips and tricks for the Space Challenge workshop. This is something that really I have a very close connection to because we are in a very space challenged workshop. So Brett, good question. There's a few tips that come to mind. One of them, at first, I would say try to be as organized as possible. If you have boxes of screws and different things all over the place, in a small shop, we just don't have time really to store all this stuff. We don't have time to be looking around and moving things out of the way. So try to find a place for everything as best you can. And a couple ways that you can do that are you have to utilize strange spaces to store things. I have little bins made that slide underneath my toolbox just to hold things in that I hardly ever need to get to. They just are on these little casters, and you just have to use any area you can think of. Use the wall space, look for any little spot you can build some sort of a divider, some sort of a container, something like that to help keep things organized and neat. When you're in the middle of working on a project, you've got to clean up. You've got to clean up during the middle of the project, you've got to clean up before the project, you've got to clean up after the project. You got to clean up a lot more. I found that the more time we take cleaning up, the easier it is to work. We don't have a big space to begin with anyway, so if we let it get accumulated and full of dirt and debris and just stuff all over the place, it gets really hard and gets really congested really fast. Another thing that I have discovered is really you have to be somewhat okay not being able to get all the tools that you want in there. There's a bunch of tools that I would love to be able to put in here, but I just don't have the room, therefore I can't do it. So you have to be sort of okay. Now we're always gonna want things, wanna get the newest, whatever, the latest and greatest, but when you don't have the room for it, you just can't. I'd love to have a CNC, but I don't have anywhere I can put a CNC right now. So I just have to be okay with the fact that I don't have a CNC at the moment, and that's okay. One day we'll be able to get it, but right now we just don't have the room for it. So another thing that I try to do is really you have to plan out certain times for certain parts of your process for whatever the project is you're working on. And what I really mean here is utilize the overnight time for things like glue ups. If I do a glue up early in the day, I don't have a whole lot of spots to set whatever that thing is to dry because it's going to be in the way for working on something else. So I want to work on what I can with the space I have, and then if I have something that I can glue up, I want to clamp that up when I'm done for the day. That way I can let it dry overnight and it's not really in my way. Now sometimes that just doesn't work out and you just have to deal with it, but whenever I can do a glue up at the end of the day, that way it's not in my way throughout the main part of the day, it always works out a little bit better. And the last thing that I have would be to utilize the outside for your workshop. If you can work outside, really your shop is huge, right? It's really nice on a nice day to be able to take some things outside, do some sanding. If you can move any of your tools outside, try to utilize the outside as much as you can because the outside is always there, right? Mm-hmm. It's not going anywhere. Why can't you use it for a workshop? I try to do the same thing myself as much as I can. It's really nice, and you've got a lot of natural light. There's just a lot of things that you don't have to deal with. Dust can just go anywhere. You don't have to clean it up. Try to use the outside as much as possible. What are you laughing at? What you got for us now?
Another question from Kathleen on Facebook. How do you like being self-employed?
I'm just gonna say, I really like it. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. The biggest thing that I like about it is the fact that you are responsible for every single thing in your business. That's also the downside. You're responsible for every single thing in the business. So if you don't get up in the morning and do what you need to do, it doesn't get done. You don't have a boss telling you what to do, and that part is good. But if you're not feeling 100% motivated that day, you also don't have a boss telling you what to do. You got to be your own boss. You got to be your own motivator. You have to be self-driven, self-motivated, which is good and bad. What are you throwing around over there?
Pencils.
The biggest advantage is that you don't necessarily have a fixed schedule. If there's something you need to do throughout the day, you absolutely have the freedom to go do that. And that's also, again, one of the negative sides. You don't have a set start time and end time. When you work like a corporate job or some sort of regular 40-hour-a-week job, you typically have a start time and an end time, and you know when you're done at the end of the day, you're done until tomorrow. Not quite the same thing for being self-employed. You're always thinking about what you need to do even in the evening. It's like when I worked a corporate job, when I would swipe out at the end of the day, kind of my brain would turn off. Horses are toppling over everywhere. When I would clock out, your brain kind of turns off for the day and you're able to relax a little bit more. At least for me, I was. And it's not quite the same being self-employed. Your brain is kind of always going in the background. But if there's something that I need to help Hayley with for school, if there's some sort of school thing, or I need to shuffle around what I'm working on to work on something else, we have the flexibility to do that, and for that is awesome. The negative side is that you're responsible for everything. You have to do the work, you have to do the promotion, you have to do the marketing, you have to do the payroll, you have to do the accounting, and you have to do all of that stuff. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just there's a ton of stuff that you have to keep in mind. And sometimes if you're trying to focus just on the project, but yet you have to stop and do this banking or accounting or whatever like that, there's just a lot of things. But overall, it's honestly the best job I've ever had. As stressful as it can be sometimes, it is the best job that I've ever had. And I get to hang out with this one more because I'm not stuck at work all the time. So that's a plus.
I guess. Harry Dude asks, which wood glues do you use for different uses, woods, and environments?
So this one I feel is somewhat related to my favorite wood glues. There's a ton of different glues. I only use a handful of them, but hopefully I can explain to you kind of when, where, and why I use the ones that I use. The number one glue that I use is Titebond 2, just regular yellow wood glue. Now it doesn't have to be Titebond, but regular yellow carpenter's glue is sometimes referred to. This could be the regular Titebond, Titebond 2. There's like Elmer's, there's other kinds of yellow wood glue. That one is the one you want to use when you're sticking two pieces of wood together that are not going to see any outside use. You can use regular wood glue. The reason I use Titebond 2 though is because it has some water resistance. Now I can't speak for every single type of yellow wood glue because I don't know the ratings on all of those. But Titebond 2 is somewhat water resistant and I use it for a lot of things, cutting boards, all that kind of stuff. If I'm going to be putting a project together, birdhouse, something like that that's gonna live outside, I definitely do not use Titebond 2. That's when I'll use Titebond 3 or some other form of waterproof wood glue. Then we would go into CA glues. I use a lot of CA glue, otherwise known as super glue. I think super glue though is a brand name. But CA glue or cyanoacrylate, it's regular old super glue. That is great for a quick bond. I don't use that in anything that is gonna be outside really as a permanent, but I use that a lot of times to hold something together while maybe a wood glue dries or maybe an epoxy dries. You can put a little dab on there. I use it also a lot for stabilizing small cracks in wood. There's just a ton of uses. I keep super glue in the house all the time, and anytime something breaks, some kind of plastic thing, even a piece of clothing, depending on what it is, you can super glue things back together. I've fixed shoes, I've fixed all kinds of stuff. There is so many things that I've fixed for Hayley using super glue. It's just an invaluable glue, in my opinion, to have on hand. There's also two-part epoxy. I always have something on hand, whether it's a larger quantity from one of the epoxy manufacturers or at least one of those little tubes of 5-minute epoxy. 5-minute epoxy is super strong, super good for bonding irregular materials, like bonding a knife scale to a knife, for instance. It works great for stuff like that. Anything irregular or where you really need to fill a large void of some sort. I use it mainly for repairing things and filling voids and cracks in wood and that sort of thing, and also bonding irregular materials. That's really the only 3 glues that I can think of that I use. Now there's other things like you could use hide glue, a lot of instrument repair luthiers use hide glue for gluing acoustic instruments together, gluing the pieces. You just use it, you're basically using it in place of wood glue. It's a very traditional, yet still strong, and it works really good. I don't have a whole lot of experience in hide glue because I don't use that. One of these days I'll probably get a glue pot, maybe get some hide glue, and we'll learn a little bit about it. But that's also a popular one for guitar repair and building. Now that's like the main ones that come to mind when I think of glues. Now there's a ton of different brands, different chemical compositions, but overall I look at yellow wood glue as a thing no matter the brand. I look at epoxy, two-part epoxy is a thing. Super glue is a thing. Of course we got hide glue. There's others in there, but those are the main ones that I'm familiar with.
Josh asks, what project are you the most proud of, and what do you wish you could do over?
All right, so this one I had to think of a little bit, but I think without a doubt, I would say there's two projects that I'm the most proud of in the entire world. One of them would be the very first Barncaster guitar I ever built from my grandpa's barn, and also my 2x72 belt grinder. Links in the description if you guys haven't seen either one of those. I am so happy with the results of both of those projects, and those are two that I am super proud of. Even though the guitar didn't come out 100% perfect, it still came out awesome. And there is a connection there because it's made out of my grandpa's barn. So I really, really love that guitar. And the belt grinder, I was so happy when that thing came together and I got it all fixed up, running, everything. It's just, every time I use it, it's just an awesome piece of equipment, and I really can't believe that I made it myself. Really, it came out so good. Probably the one that I would do over if I could, which I probably will at some point, would actually be the jewelry holder that I made for Hayley. Not because it's terrible, it's not terrible at all. It's on the wall, it's packed up, it gets used every day, huh? We use it all the time. The big thing that I would like to redo, or at least revisit, is the wire inlay. I did those butterfly wire inlays in there, and when I was setting the wire into the wood, I used super glue, but I used thin super glue, and it wicked out into the wood. And it really just didn't give me the cleanest results that I wanted, so that's something that I would like to revisit. But again, not because I don't like the jewelry holder. I do, and it works fine. It's just that wire inlay didn't come out very well.
What wire inlay?
The butterflies that are covered up with the stuff that's on the shelf. We'll have to look. Did you forget the butterflies weren't even on there?
I didn't even know that in the first place.
See, there you go. I didn't do a very good job on the wire inlay. It doesn't stand out.
George asks, do you prefer tongue oil or linseed oil?
Tongue oil or linseed oil? Honestly, the straight up quick answer, linseed oil. But they both work very similar. It's kind of a finishing oil of sorts. The reason I choose linseed oil over tongue oil is really tongue oil, the times that I have used, and I'm talking about pure tongue oil, it just doesn't seem to dry for a really long time, and it's got a weird smell. It's got a funky smell. They both smell kind of weird. Linseed oil, I feel, smells kind of like peanuts or something like that, but the tongue oil, I don't like the smell. We did that floating shelf for Hayley not long ago. Honestly, you can still smell that tongue oil on there. If you get up kind of close to it, take a sniff. In fact, next time you climb in bed, give it a sniff. You'll be able to smell the tongue oil. It just doesn't seem to clear out. I don't know why that is. So, therefore, my finish of choice out of those two would be the linseed oil. I like the way it applies. It does smell kind of weird, but it seems to dry fairly quickly, and that'd be my answer.
This question was asked by both Josh and Kathleen. What is your most and least favorite tool, and why?
I would say probably right off the top of my head would be my drum sander. I have a Supermax 1632 drum sander. It is such a great tool. It saves a ton of time on a lot of projects. I don't always use it in every video project, but I do use it all the time around the shop for a lot of different things. It's great for fine dimensioning boards, of course, just rough sanding things down, flattening guitar bodies. It's just a great tool, and if you're interested in getting one, I highly recommend getting a drum sander. My least favorite though, I'm kind of thinking I might change my answer a little bit. I was gonna say my scroll saw. In fact, that's what I have down here on some notes, would be my scroll saw, would be my least favorite. I think I don't like it because it's a little bit of a pain. You got to remove the blade, feed it up through the thing, and maybe it's just because I don't have like a really high-end one or anything. I got a pretty inexpensive model. It works fine. It's not that it doesn't work or anything, but I don't know, it's just kind of awkward. I'm also not a fan of the jigsaw either. I use it for projects, but it's not my favorite. So probably the scroll saw and the jigsaw would probably be my two least favorite. Not because I don't think they're a valuable tool to have though. It's just...
They're useful.
They are useful.
But...
It's just not my favorite, if that makes sense. It's not a great answer, but that's what I got. So I think that wraps up the questions that we have here. If there's other questions that you'd like to see answered in a future episode, leave that down in the comments. Right now, I've got a special bonus round. It's called Ask Hayley 3 Things. Hayley, what's your favorite food?
Ice cream.
What's your favorite game to play?
Pokey.
What?
Pokey is actually an online website. P-O-K-I.
What's your favorite thing to do in school?
Recess.
What's your favorite animal?
Horse.
What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Ha! Speed round. I know I said 3 things, but I think that was 5, so right on. Thanks, kiddo. So thanks a lot for watching this episode, guys. Again, if you've got a question that you'd like to see answered in a future episode, leave it down below. You can get a hold of us on social media, and we'll try to answer the questions. Not something we're going to do all the time, but it is kind of fun once in a while. Thanks a lot, Hayley, for reading the questions. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next time. We got 2 more.
How did you guys know that?
Because they're smart. They're the ones who ask the questions. Of course they know. Next. What do you got next, kiddo?
Nothing.
What? Nothing?
We're done.
We're not done. We got a few more. Apparently, Hayley has turned into a horse. Breaking news. Today, horse takes over home built workshop. Take it away, horse.